morning Year 4, and this is your literacy video on Thursday the 4th of March for if you are in my literacy set. So remember, on a Wednesday, Thursday and Friday we work in our yellow books and we do a writing activity, don't we? Now because it's a writing activity, I am going to start by looking at some phonics, and this week we've been looking at the I sound. Who can remember how many different ways there are of making the I sound? Okay, so there's 5, isn't there? And can anybody remember any of those ways? What letters combine together, or what single letters can we use to make an I sound? Are you ready to have a little look? I wonder who managed to remember them. So, we've got I-G-H, I, Y, I-E, I, split digraph, I, and then I for I. And these different I sounds appear at different points in our words. I quite often remember this one as I for night. And we also use a Y quite a lot for an I sound if it's at the end of a word. Our split digraph always has an E at the end, and we can sometimes use an I to create an I sound, like in the word tidy. The most common way that we use is I-E together. So let's have a little reminder of some words. Okay, so we've got H-I, high, Fl-I, fly, P-I, pie, Sl-I-D, slide, F-I-N-D, find. I want you now to have a think and to write down in your yellow book some different words that use each of my I sounds. I want to so 2 words for each I sound. That's your first challenge. Now we've been looking at a book this week. Can you remember what that book was? We've got a picture of a boy, a picture of a cow, some beans and a beanstalk. Can you remember what our story was Year 4? It was Jack and the Beanstalk. So here we've got Jack, the little boy, our main character, who sells Daisy the cow. And he sells her for some magic beans instead of money. The magic beans get thrown out of the window and start to grow into an enormous beanstalk. And Jack has just climbed to the top of that beanstalk, and he sneaks through an open door. Let's see what happens next. Jack stared in amazement. All of the furniture was huge. The chairs and tables towered above him like skyscrapers. There was a bowl of water on the floor for a cat or dog to drink from, but it was so big Jack could have bathed in it. Suddenly, the floor beneath Jack's feet began to shake, and Jack heard a loud rumbling noise. His heart was beating loudly in his chest as he scurried quickly inside a cupboard to hide. Who do we think is coming Year 4? A colossal giant marched into the room. Jack peered nervously through a hole in the cupboard door. The giant's face was covered by a bushy brown beard. He had rosy cheeks, and there was not a single hair on the top of his head. Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman, bellowed the giant mercenarily. Jack shivered with fear. The terrifying giant sat down at the table. On the table was a hen and a golden harp. The glittering harp caught Jack's eye, and, although he was petrified, he watched with fascination. Lay, said the giant, and the hen laid an egg. The egg was made of solid gold. Jack was mesmerised by the bright shining egg as he watched through the hole in the cupboard door. Sing, said the giant, and the harp sang. A beautiful, calming song came out of the harp, and it seemed to cast a sort of spell over the giant because he soon fell asleep. When Jack was certain that the giant was fully asleep, he crept out from his hiding place and skillfully climbed up the table leg and onto the tabletop. He grabbed the hen and the harp and made a daring leap down to the ground. The hen nestled happily under Jack's arm, but the harp was alarmed to be grabbed by a stranger. As Jack headed towards the door, the harp cried, "Help, master!" The harp shouting woke up the snoozing giant. He jumped up from his chair and spotted Jack. "Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman." The giant started to chase Jack. Jack didn't stop to look behind him. He ran with all his might. The giant got closer and closer. The giant's stride was so vast he was able to catch up with Jack quickly. Jack reached the beanstalk and started to climb back down it. He was breathing very quickly and his heart was racing. It was not easy climbing down a beanstalk whilst holding on to a hen and a harp. The beanstalk shook. Jack looked upwards. The giant had got onto the beanstalk and was climbing down after him. When Jack reached the bottom, he stumbled onto the ground, utterly exhausted. "Help!" he shouted at the top of his voice. He knew that the giant wasn't far behind him. Jack's mother came rushing towards the beanstalk with an axe in her hand. Without hesitation, she sprinted to the base of the beanstalk and began chopping at it frantically. The beanstalk began to wobble, and a loud cry came from above them. The giant fell and crashed into the ground. He was never seen again. Jack hugged his mother. "Thank you," he smiled, still out of breath and shaking all over. "I'm so glad to have you back," she whispered, looking at him lovingly. Jack's mother was delighted to see the golden harp and hen. The harp now seemed happy to call Jack his new master, and the hen quickly started to lay golden eggs on Jack's command. In fact, Jack was able to sell the golden eggs to buy Daisy back. They didn't have to worry about having enough money again, and they all lived happily ever after. Okay, so that was our story. That's how our story ended. And your learning question today says, can I write consistently, so that means all of the time, in the past tense? And remember, past tense means that it's already happened before now. And lots of our past tense words end in ED. And your challenge for today is to write some sentences to match my pictures. So we'll do this one together and then it's your turn. So in my picture I've got Jack and his mum, got Daisy the cow, and they look quite happy really. So Jack and his mum lived, where did they live? Can you remember? In a cottage. So let's have a go at writing that sentence. Capital letter for Jack. Jack cottage. Full stop. And who can spot my past tense word there, year 4? Jack and his mum lived in a cottage. So it's lived, isn't it? Well done if you got that at home. What else could I write about for that picture? Jack and his mum lived in a cottage. They had a cow called Daisy. They had a cow called Daisy. And our past tense word in that sentence is had. And your challenge for today, year 4, is to write me 6 sentences. 1 sentence for each picture. So we've got Jack's mum throwing the beans out of the window. Jack's mum threw the beans out of the window. Then we've got Jack. Jack climbed the beanstalk. He saw an open door. The giant had a hen and a hearth. Jack ran off with the hen and the hearth and climbed down the beanstalk, but the giant followed him. So your challenge is to write a sentence for each picture, and don't forget to complete your checklist after. So go through each sentence. Capital letter, if you have, give it a tick. Finger spaces, full stop, and does it make sense? So you've got 6 sentences to write today, year 4. Okay, and then let's end our learning with a quick challenge. Change this sentence to the past tense. Jack was falling down from the beanstalk at an epic speed. What could you change in that sentence to make it the past tense? Let's roll our dice just before we finish today's lesson. Okay, number 1, what does past tense mean? Don't forget to take a picture and send it to the Year 4 email address.